everybody. This is episode 89 of the Daniel 3 podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you're tuning in live here, it's 10:58 p.m. Eastern time right now, so it's a pretty late stream. Not going to go too long, but so I've been teasing for the last few episodes that there was some changes and a big announcement coming up, and then this past week I started to promote that the announcement had to do with the Libertarian Christian Institute, and that announcement would be made during the Libertarian Christian Institute's 300th episode, which just finished up, and that's why I'm streaming now. But and thank you, Carly, for the congratulations. I greatly appreciate that. So I'm gonna have the link for the 300th episode in the show notes for this episode once it's done streaming. So definitely go and watch that to get like a full rundown on everything. But I also wanted to, just for my listeners, both on the YouTube and my audio listeners as well, to announce it here and also to go into more detail about what's going to change with this stream going forward. So the announcement, to get to it now, is that I am starting a podcast with the Libertarian Christian Institute and their new podcast network, which is the Christians for Liberty Network. So they got a whole slew of people. They have their flagship podcast. They have the Faith Seeking Freedom podcast. They have Reformed Libertarian podcast, which if you're familiar with Greg Baus and Kerry Baldwin, fellow Reformed Libertarian anarchists who have been on my show several times, they are joining together to do a podcast focusing on connecting Reformed theology and philosophy to libertarian anarchism. So definitely recommend that. Mike Meharry from the 10th Amendment Center and host of Godarchy, his podcast is also joining the network. They're going to continue with the Good News, Bad News with Matthew Bellis, and then yours truly, myself, will be hosting the Biblical Anarchy podcast. So this podcast, when I started it out, so actually this podcast has been through a couple name changes. It started out as Daniel 3 Obey God Over the State, later renamed to Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy. That got to be a mouthful after a while, and I just started calling it the Daniel 3 podcast. And this is going to continue to be called the Daniel 3 podcast, but the Biblical Anarchy subtitle is now going to be detached from it, and that is going to be, the title of the new podcast I'm doing with the Libertarian Christian Institute. The Daniel 3 podcast, this one, is obviously going to continue, but I'm going to take it in a different direction. So whereas the Biblical Anarchy podcast with the Libertarian Christian Institute is going to be, very specific in its focus, which is to make the biblical case for a anarchist society. The Daniel 3 podcast, this podcast stream and feed is going to shift gears into more of a sort of like, grab bag, miscellaneous, whatever, flavor of the week kind of episode, kind of the format I've been doing over the last 2 episodes specifically. It's mostly going to be live streams because the LCI podcast is all going to be pre-recorded stuff, which is good, but it's different, and I like doing the live streams like this as well because I get a chance to interact with the audience, answer questions and whatnot. So this will be a podcast that's focused more on doing those live streams, kind of covering current events, covering the things that have happened in the country or in the LP or etc. Or still having panels on from time to time of fellow podcasters or interesting guests that maybe we want to have a conversation here on this channel that can be more free range, open form, and more long form. The Biblical Anarchy podcast is going to be like a 40 to 60 minute recording, whereas these podcasts over here on this channel, as if you've watched it, they can an hour and a half, 2 hours or more isn't unheard of when I have a crew of people on. So this podcast is no longer going to, I always kind of oscillated back and forth between, am I going to do the fun conversations with a bunch of people, or am I going to do the live streams, or am I going to focus on the biblical anarchy content? And this division actually helps out with, you know, a now I have the Biblical Anarchy podcast, and I have help with that through the Libertarian Christian Institute and their resources and infrastructure and the different people there who can help. I'm able to focus on just creating content there and putting out that sort of like scholarly exegetical commentary of biblical scripture and Christian theology and Christian writings and things like that, and to focus on making that case for, biblically based anarchism. And then on this channel, I mean, obviously, that's part of my identity as a Christian anarchist. It's going to come up, but it's not going to be the sole focus, and I'm not going to feel like I have to, tie every episode necessarily into that. This will be just more of, a personal podcast where I can talk about whatever I want with whoever I want. So, still going to do call-in shows, still going to do the live streams and the, AMAs and sort of like, going over recent Twitter posts and recent controversies or recent current events and talking about them. And trying to do more, I used to do, the kind of panel shows more often, and I haven't done those in a while, so I'm definitely going to do those again, because I think those can be a lot of fun. If you guys are anything like me, I don't know how much variety you like, but I tend to I need to shift gears from different types of podcasts, and it's like I can't just listen to informational podcasts all the time, and I can't just listen to long form conversational podcasts all the time, and I kind of like to switch it up, and sometimes I'm in the mood to listen to an audiobook or listen to a podcast series that's doing deep dives and more more educational, more scholarly in its approach to kind of dissecting a topic and sort of doing it in a more like formalized way, versus sometimes it's like your brain's just like, I've had enough of that, and you just want to have some nice banter to listen to in the background while you're doing stuff. So that's definitely going to be the sort of the dichotomy that I'm presenting here with these two podcasts. But so those of you who are listening to this stream, whether it's on YouTube or whether you're listening to the audio feeds, it's not going to go away, and I hope you continue to tune in and listen. And I feel very humbled by the the audience that I've been able to build up through this podcast, and the fact that I get enough views that I'm able to get a little bit of revenue just to go towards offsetting the costs of everything. And certainly if anyone wants to contribute further to that, to my ability to do both this podcast and the new podcast with the Libertarian Christian Institute, obviously the two ways you can support me are either to go to my Patreon account, which would be patreon.com/biblical anarchy, and that's a way you can support me directly. I would also really heavily encourage you to go to biblicalanarchypodcast.com and to contribute to the show through that link, which is through the Libertarian Christian Institute, because I'm a member of LCI now, and I want to support their mission, and the podcast is, supposed to, the podcast is part of joining LCI in trying to combine our efforts and resources to make a more concerted effort to, through our diverse voices and talents, reach more people with, A, the good news of the gospel, and B, with the message of how, to live out the gospel is to, in its most consistent application, to live out a libertarian ethic in terms of, human relationships and authority and government and social cooperation. So, um, you contribute however much you want or can, however you feel led to. If you don't know where to go, I would, I'm going to more strongly encourage you to donate through LCI than to donate to me uh, personally, only because, this podcast is going to become more of a something I do for, the entertainment purposes of it. It's not going to be, where I focus a lot of the hard work at. I really want to and I really want to, get the new podcast off the ground. So beyond just if you want to support financially, with a monthly gift or something like that, if you, what would really help is if when the new podcast launches, which will be November 14th, if you can go over and subscribe to, whether that's to the YouTube channel or whether that's to the audio feed or however you consume the material, if you can go on there and, give it 5-star ratings if it's, Apple Podcast or Spotify or whatever, leave a review, stuff like that, because it's going to be starting from scratch to a certain extent. And so to build that up and get it going, if you guys can, those of you who are watching me here can also come and join me there, that'd be greatly appreciated. So that's it. That's the big announcement that I have been teasing. It's very late, so I'm probably going to get headed to bed. So I, again, appreciate everyone who has watched the show up until this point. It will continue, but please also go and, if you can, subscribe to the Biblical Anarchy podcast through the Libertarian Christian Institute. And I hope to continue seeing you guys in the comments and stuff here as well, and continuing to, with your support, go out there and put that message out that we all want to put out. So that's it for tonight, and I hope you all have a good, fantastic weekend, and we will talk soon.